Some breaking news. Right now, markets are down after President Trump escalated his trade war this morning.
President Trump is now threatening Apple with an industry-altering ultimatum. Either build hundreds of millions of iPhones in the United States or pay tariffs of at least 25% on iPhones that are made overseas.
Therefore, I am recommending a straight 50% tariff on the European Union starting on June 1st of 2025.
We're supposed to be, Errol, in that 90-day pause in Trump's global tariff scheme that is supposed to stretch into August. But this shows once again that Trump can change things, does change things.
In his latest moves, President Trump made it crystal clear that he's not interested in making trade deals. Instead, he's laser-focused on hitting Europe where it hurts with aggressive tariffs. He told journalists at the Oval Office that he does not want any negotiations with Europe. He only wants the EU to pay what he demands.
I'm not looking for a deal. I mean, we've set the deal, it's at 50%. But again, there is no tariff if they build their plant here.
The shockwave started when Trump demanded Apple move every single step of its iPhone production back to the US. Not just assembly, but the entire supply chain. Or face a crushing 25% tariff. And it's not just Apple. Samsung and other manufacturers are caught in the crossfire, with a tight deadline looming at the end of June.
Do you have the power to tariff one single company? And why would you want to hurt an American company in that way?
It would be more. It would be also Samsung and anybody that makes that product. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair.
But here's the real bombshell. Trump blindsided the European Union by threatening to slap a staggering 50% tariff on European goods starting June 1st. Blowing up the fragile 90-day trade truce. Europe's response has been cautious and hesitant, trying to downplay the threat as mere proposals rather than firm policy, clearly walking on eggshells to avoid triggering further escalation.
See this, trying to be careful not to make, as another step.
Meanwhile, the markets are crashing once again. The S&P 500, NASDAQ, German stocks, French stocks, you name it, they are all in the red. In this video, we are breaking it all down and explaining the details that will help you understand the true reason why Trump is doing this and why the European Union feels so powerless to react. Before you go on, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Let's get into it. When President Trump announced his demand that Apple move the entire production of its iconic iPhone back to the United States, he didn't just stop at assembly lines. He insisted that every part of the supply chain, from the tiny microchips to the cameras and batteries, had to be relocated as well, or else the company would face a crippling 25% tariff on all imported devices. This was not a casual suggestion, but a firm ultimatum, with a compliance deadline set for the end of June. It wasn't just Apple caught in this net. Other major smartphone makers, such as Samsung, were also compelled to comply with these demands. The shockwaves of this decision reverberated far beyond US borders. Across the Atlantic, the European Union was blindsided by a sudden threat of 50% tariffs starting June 1st, even though a 90-day pause agreement had been in place to ease escalating tensions. But President Trump, using his preferred platform of Truth Social, abruptly canceled that truce, throwing months of careful diplomatic negotiation into chaos. This surprise move sent the financial markets into turmoil, with Germany's DAX and France's CAC indexes plummeting by more than 2%, while the United Kingdom's FTSE fell about 0.7%. These sharp drops reflected a sudden resurgence of fear and uncertainty among investors, who had been hoping for a calmer trade environment after a brief period of relative stability. So, how has the EU responded so far? The European Union's trade chief just gave a clear and sharp message to the United States. We want a fair deal, not threats. This isn't just talk. If Trump goes through with this, it could shake the global economy, and it might tear apart one of the world's most important trade partnerships. After a tense phone call with top US officials, EU Trade Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič said Europe is still open to a deal, but only one based on mutual respect. He added, "We will defend ourselves." That's not just diplomacy. That's a warning. And here's where it gets dangerous. On the same day Trump made the threat, another EU commissioner suggested that the best strategy could be to ignore the noise and just carry on instead of reacting to every provocation.
British traditional, saying, keep calm and carry on, it's really a very practical suggestion to all of us.
The US and the EU trade about $1 trillion every year. That trade supports millions of jobs in factories, farms, tech companies, and more. If Trump slaps a 50% tax on all European products, everything from wine and cheese to cars and jet engines will suddenly cost a lot more. Businesses will panic. Supply chains will break. Prices will go up for everyone. And Europe won't just sit back and take it. Brussels has been preparing for this kind of fight. It has its own list of US goods to hit with tariffs. It's ready to take the US to court at the World Trade Organization. And if needed, it might even start working more closely with China. Yes, China, to stand against Washington's threats. It is scary because this is a major clash between two giants who used to be close allies. Now, they're starting to act more like enemies. And if this explodes into a full-blown trade war, it won't just hurt politicians. It will hit workers, families, and businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. The escalating tariff threats aimed at the European Union hit at the heart of some of the bloc's most vital export industries. Germany's automobile giants, such as Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, represent not just national pride but hundreds of billions of euros in trade with the United States. Pharmaceutical powerhouses like France's Sanofi and the UK-based AstraZeneca produce medicines essential to healthcare systems on both sides of the Atlantic, while industrial machinery manufacturers like Siemens underpin Europe's technological and economic competitiveness worldwide. These sectors collectively account for an enormous share of transatlantic trade, and the imposition of tariffs on these industries threatens to upend decades of carefully cultivated economic integration. In the aftermath of Brexit, the United Kingdom is seeking preferential treatment in trade negotiations with the United States, hoping to capitalize on its newly independent status. However, the European Union itself is adopting a far tougher posture, unwilling to be treated as a secondary player or a mere Gulf petrostate whose resources and products can be exploited without consequence. The EU's hardened stance signals a potential fracturing of the long-standing Western alliance, a fracture that risks creating a power vacuum on the global stage. This vacuum, in turn, offers China a wider berth to expand its influence and deepen its economic ties with European nations, leveraging their dissatisfaction and Washington's growing unilateralism. Are we witnessing the beginning of a new era best described as America alone, where traditional alliances dissolve and global power shifts dramatically? Meanwhile, the idea of Apple bringing manufacturing back to America sounds straightforward and even patriotic at first glance, but it completely ignores the enormous complexities hidden beneath the surface of modern electronics production. Apple itself does not manufacture iPhones. Instead, it relies heavily on a vast global network of more than 1,000 suppliers, with the majority of these companies and factories located in China. The heart of this network is in Shenzhen, a city renowned worldwide for its dense concentration of electronics manufacturing expertise and infrastructure. Foxconn, Apple's main assembly partner, operates a colossal factory complex capable of producing over 230 million iPhones every year. But Foxconn's role is much more than assembly alone. It orchestrates thousands of specialized components from a multitude of suppliers located not just in China but across the globe, all coordinated with sophisticated logistics and just-in-time delivery systems. This high degree of specialization and efficiency is a result of decades of incremental development, investment, and industrial clustering that simply does not exist in the United States today. Attempting to replicate this intricate network in America would be a monumental task, requiring the construction of enormous Shenzhen-style megafactories, rapid tooling and prototyping facilities, and the retraining of a workforce that currently lacks experience with these specific, highly complex manufacturing processes. The U.S. industrial base has been hollowed out over the past several decades, with many factories shuttered and specialized manufacturing expertise lost or eroded. Unlike China, which benefits from vast supplier clusters concentrated in specific cities, The US supply chain is far more fragmented and less integrated for this type of production. Therefore, this is not a simple question of moving assembly lines. It is about rebuilding an entire industrial ecosystem from scratch, a process that could take many years, cost billions of dollars, and still might never match the efficiency and scale of the current Chinese model. This leads to a critical question. Is this aggressive push for reshoring truly about reviving American manufacturing in a sustainable way? Or is it primarily a political performance? And history suggests it may be just that. During President Trump's earlier term, Apple made headlines when it pledged to establish 3 big, beautiful factories in the United States. A promise that excited supporters of American manufacturing, but quickly turned hollow as none of these factories ever came to fruition. But let's look at it from another angle. If Apple were to comply with President Trump's demands and move the entire supply chain to the United States, the economic consequences would be severe and almost immediate for American consumers. The cost of labor in China is significantly lower than in the United States, and Apple's current production model benefits from economies of scale, streamlined logistics, and years of process optimization. Industry experts estimate that these changes could cause the retail price of an iPhone to soar from its current price range of approximately $800 to $1,200 to an eye-popping $3,500, or even more. At that price, the iPhone would no longer be a device that most consumers can afford or justify purchasing. It would instead become a luxury item, accessible only to the wealthiest. Apple would then face a stark dilemma. The company could choose to absorb the higher costs, but this would severely cut into profit margins and potentially undermine its financial health. Alternatively, it could pass the costs entirely onto consumers, risking a sharp drop in sales volumes as customers look for cheaper alternatives or simply forego upgrading their devices. Neither choice is good for the company or the American consumer. Apple's ongoing flirtation with promises to bring massive manufacturing back to the United States is far from a new development. In fact, this is not the first time the company has responded to pressure from the White House with grand declarations that ultimately failed to materialize into tangible factories or production lines on American soil. Instead, Apple's follow-up announcement of a $430 billion investment was mostly centered on enhancing office spaces, expanding research and development facilities, and upgrading digital infrastructure, rather than creating new industrial capacity or jobs for factory workers. This raised serious doubts about the true commitment behind these promises. Now, once again, Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, is floating a similarly ambitious-sounding promise, this time pledging a staggering $500 billion in investment in the United States. However, as before, the announcement is notably vague on specifics. There is little clarity on how much of that money will actually go toward building factories, hiring manufacturing workers, or reshoring critical supply chains. After being burned once, President Trump appears determined not to let Cook off the hook this time, signaling a willingness to enforce compliance and perhaps daring the tech giant to make good on its pledge rather than bluffing again. As the United States increasingly alienates its traditional European allies and disrupts supply chains critical to Asia-bound trade, China is quietly positioning itself to reap the benefits of the chaos it has helped create. Beijing is steadily presenting itself as a reliable and stable alternative for countries seeking secure trade relationships and investment partners. Unlike Washington's aggressive tariff hikes and trade ultimatums, China is pursuing a more calculated diplomatic offensive, forging deeper economic ties with EU economies and other global partners through consistent engagement rather than coercion. While the West is caught in a spiral of internal disputes and tit-for-tat tariffs, China is moving quietly but decisively. Its calm, consistent diplomacy is winning over countries weary of Washington's volatility. By presenting itself as the stable alternative, Beijing is steadily securing new footholds in global supply chains and rewriting the rules of trade. If this continues, the US won't just lose market share, it could lose its role as the anchor of the global economy. And in its place, a China-led system shaped not by threats, but by strategy. We'll be tracking every move, from Apple's next decision to the EU's counterpunch. So make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. The next chapter in this global showdown is just beginning.